Behind the glamorous premieres of 1960s to 1990s British cinema hides a darker reality. We idolized these stars, but behind closed doors, their children faced an unimaginably cold upbringing. Today, we uncover the 10 most unforgiving parents in British film history. Some names will completely shock you, whilst others kept their family secrets buried for years. Which of these tragic fates touches you the most? Leave a comment below, and do not forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss our deep dives into the shadows of showbiz. Peter Sellers, the man who brought endless laughter to millions across the globe, was entirely unrecognizable when the studio lights finally switched off. Renowned for his extraordinary comedic timing and countless unforgettable characters throughout the 1960s and 70s, his private world was utterly devoid of that same warmth. To the public audience, he was a cinematic genius, but to his own offspring, he remained a remarkably distant and deeply unpredictable figure, shrouded in heavy emotional storms. A profound sense of isolation defined the childhood of those who grew up under his shadow. Rather than offering paternal guidance, this legendary actor often projected his own deep inner turmoil onto his family. His shifting moods dictated the atmosphere of their grand household, transforming everyday life into a delicate walk across fragile glass. Affection was never given freely, but rather treated as a rare reward that could be swiftly snatched away without the slightest moment of prior warning. Conversations with his heirs were frequently laced with biting sarcasm, or followed by stretches of freezing silence that lasted for weeks on end. Even simple attempts to seek his approval were met with a chilling indifference that left lasting scars on their minds. Letters exchanged later revealed a father who was tragically incapable of separating his theatrical personas from his actual identity, treating his own flesh and blood merely as temporary supporting cast members in his complicated existence. The most devastating blow came during the final act of his incredibly successful yet turbulent life on this earth. When his earthly journey concluded in 1980, his ultimate testament delivered a shocking rejection from beyond the grave. Despite accumulating a massive fortune throughout his highly lucrative career in motion pictures, he deliberately chose to leave his eldest children an insultingly minuscule sum of just £800 each, a mere fraction of his vast financial empire. This parting gesture cemented his legacy not just as a titan of British cinema, but as one of the most unforgiving patriarchs in the history of the screen. The financial deprivation was nothing compared to the profound emotional void he left behind. His descendants spent their remaining years attempting to reconcile the brilliant artist loved by the world with the immensely complicated, stern stranger they were forced to call father behind the heavily locked doors of their deeply fractured family home. Ultimately, the tragedy of this comedic mastermind serves as a stark reminder that immense brilliance often demands a heavy toll. While his flawless performances continue to be celebrated, the private tears shed by his children remain a hidden footnote. His story stands as a dark testament to the fact that those who shine the brightest on the cinematic stage can sometimes cast the most crushing and sorrowful shadows over the fragile hearts of the very people who were supposed to be closest to them. Laurence Olivier, far removed from the uproarious comedy of our previous subject, the realm of high theatrical drama brings us to a titan of the classical stage and silver screen. Widely regarded as the absolute pinnacle of British acting throughout the mid-20th century, this magnificent performer could command any room with his booming voice and piercing gaze. Yet for those residing within his own household, that exact same majestic presence often felt more like an impenetrable fortress of solid ice. His supreme dedication to his craft meant that his artistic pursuits always reigned supreme, leaving his loved ones waiting quietly in the wings of his magnificent life. The pursuit of perfection on the cinematic screen consumed his every waking hour during the 1960s and beyond, transforming him into an incredibly absent patriarch. When he did return to the family hearth, his offspring found themselves desperately trying to connect with a man entirely hollowed out by his grand roles. The emotional distance he maintained from his eldest son was particularly striking and deeply heartbreaking. As a young boy desperately seeking approval, his child often found his father retreating into his private study, barricading himself behind thick doors to avoid the messy realities of domestic existence. Warm affection was terribly scarce, replaced instead by a formidable aristocratic sternness that demanded absolute quiet and unwavering obedience from everyone in his living space. Those exceptionally rare moments of interaction were frequently dominated by a sharp, highly critical tongue that could effortlessly shatter a youthful spirit. He held his own flesh and blood to impossibly high standards, offering swift judgments rather than gentle encouragement. Whenever his son attempted to forge his own unique path or express individuality, he was met with dismissive remarks that echoed through their home, leaving deep emotional scars that would take many decades to heal. The ultimate tragedy of this highly revered figure was his absolute inability to switch off the demanding director residing permanently within his mind. He treated his family relationships exactly like theatrical productions, where he held total control, and anyone failing to meet his exacting directions was swiftly cut from the scene. The profound alienation grew so immense that lengthy periods would pass without a single word exchanged, creating a chilling silence that erased familial warmth. By the time he reached the gentle twilight of his life in the late 1980s, the immense chasm between him and his firstborn had become practically impossible to bridge. The world mourned the heavy loss of a cinematic knight, a true pioneer who brought unparalleled grandeur to the silver screen. However, his private legacy remained forever stained by the sorrowful truth that a man who could effortlessly move millions to tears simply could not find it in his heart to embrace his son. Rex Harrison. Elegance and unparalleled charm defined his on-screen persona, captivating audiences with a beautifully refined aristocratic grace. This particular gentleman of the silver screen was adored globally for his sophisticated musical roles and unmatched wit during the 1960s. Yet beneath that immaculately tailored exterior lay a startlingly cold heart when it came to his own progeny. The polished illusion he presented to the adoring masses masked a deeply self-absorbed reality at home, leaving his children entirely behind. To say he was merely an absent father would be a profound understatement of the grim reality his sons endured. He treated fatherhood not as a sacred duty, but rather as an inconvenient distraction from his illustrious theatrical career and endless string of highly publicized romances. As he moved seamlessly from one glamorous marriage to another, his boys were frequently left in the care of distant relatives or strict boarding schools, deeply deprived of any genuine parental affection or warmth. Whenever the incredibly rare occasion arose for a family gathering, the atmosphere was invariably fraught with a suffocating tension. He demanded absolute perfection and unwavering obedience, treating his own flesh and blood with the same haughty disdain he reserved for underperforming stagehands. An overwhelming sense of inadequacy was constantly instilled in their young minds, as any attempts to win his elusive approval were instantly crushed beneath his ruthlessly sharp and cutting intellect. Financial generosity was never a substitute for his glaring emotional bankruptcy, and even his material support came with immensely heavy conditions. He firmly believed that providing a famous surname was more than enough inheritance, actively refusing to offer the vital guidance a young soul needs to navigate life. Letters from his sons, pleading for a mere sliver of his time or understanding, were routinely ignored or answered with incredibly brief, dismissive notes that lacked any real empathy. The heavy emotional toll of living in the perpetual shadow of such an egotistical giant inevitably left profound wounds that would shape their entire adult lives. They spent decades seeking the validation they were so tragically denied during their formative years, struggling to build their own identities away from his crushing legacy. The sparkling champagne and relentless applause that fueled his existence entirely blinded him to the silent heartbreak echoing within his own lonely family walls. When he finally departed this world in 1990, he left behind a highly celebrated cinematic catalogue and a deeply fractured familial legacy. The public mourned a legendary knight of the British theatre, yet those closest to him were left to mourn the loving father they never truly had. His story remains a stark and devastating illustration of how supreme artistic brilliance can sometimes be paired with an absolutely breathtaking lack of human empathy for those waiting in the shadows. Anthony Hopkins. Stepping away from the glamour of the vintage era, we encounter a magnificent force of British theatre and film whose chilling portrayals of cold intellect often bled into his personal reality. Rising to immense prominence throughout the late 1960s and beyond, his phenomenal talent was universally celebrated. Yet behind the mesmerizing intensity of his on-screen gaze existed a profoundly detached patriarch who inflicted a devastatingly silent heartbreak upon his only child. The unraveling of his family unit began when his daughter was merely a toddler, right as his theatrical ambitions and personal inner storms began taking supreme precedence over his domestic harmony. Leaving the family home in the late 1960s, he initiated an incredibly vast emotional chasm that would never truly be closed. Rather than maintaining a supportive presence, he completely vanished into his skyrocketing career and highly turbulent lifestyle, entirely abandoning his paternal duties. Growing up entirely outside the warm glow of a fatherly embrace, his child navigated her formative years shadowed by a suffocating sense of rejection. Whenever brief attempts at reconciliation were staged during the following decades, they were tragically met with an icy, insurmountable wall of profound indifference. He treated their fragile bond with the exact same ruthless detachment one might use when discarding an old theatrical script, utterly refusing to acknowledge the deep sorrow he had caused. The profound cruelty of his approach was not rooted in fiery domestic arguments, but rather in a terrifyingly absolute apathy that completely froze the soul. In deeply candid moments much later in his life, he publicly admitted his complete lack of interest in her earthly existence, stating with chilling calmness that he simply did not know or care about her path. This astonishing level of public detachment from his own flesh and blood sent colossal shockwaves through his adoring global audience. For a young woman trying to carve out her own artistic identity, having a globally worshipped cinematic genius publicly disown her caused an incredibly unique and enduring agony. She was forced to watch his face illuminated on colossal silver screens across the world, whilst being fiercely denied even a single ounce of his affection in private. The heavy burden of his legendary surname became a painful reminder of the stark emptiness that defined their completely shattered and unfixable relationship. His astonishingly brilliant performances will undoubtedly echo through the halls of cinema for countless centuries to come, heavily decorated with prestigious golden statuettes. Yet the incredibly sorrowful tale of his abandoned daughter serves as a remarkably grim counterbalance to his shining professional accolades. It stands as a harrowing reminder that a man can possess the magnificent capability to understand human emotion for a role, whilst offering absolutely nothing to his own lonely child. Sean Connery. Shifting our focus towards the realm of thrilling espionage, we uncover the heavily guarded domestic life of the ultimate cinematic secret agent. Throughout the 1960s and 70s, his suave portrayal of a gentleman spy made him a global icon of undeniable masculinity and rugged Scottish charm. However, beneath that incredibly polished and charismatic exterior lay a ruthlessly tough patriarch who firmly believed that parental warmth was merely a dangerous sign of weakness. Rising from the remarkably impoverished streets of his youth, this celebrated superstar developed an exceptionally fiercely guarded relationship with his immense wealth. Rather than using his vast fortune to provide a comfortable foundation for his only son, he wielded his financial power as a heavy weapon of control. He harbored an intense fear that his offspring would grow up hopelessly spoiled, deciding instead to subject him to a deeply punishing regime of extreme financial deprivation. As his heir attempted to step into the demanding world of professional acting, the legendary father offered absolutely no guidance or paternal encouragement. Instead of opening doors, he publicly expressed severe doubts regarding his son's artistic abilities, creating a suffocating atmosphere of crushing judgment. Rumors frequently swirled that he viciously threatened to cut the young man entirely out of his colossal will, demanding that he must survive without a single penny of help. The tension between the two generations grew incredibly bitter as the decades rolled steadily onward into the 1980s and 1990s. When the press probed into their fractured bond, the celebrated icon offered remarkably blunt and chillingly unsympathetic responses that completely shattered any illusion of a happy family. His son was forced to endure the immense humiliation of reading about his father's deep disappointment in global newspapers, exposing a private agony. Their profound estrangement stretched over numerous long and sorrowful years, marked by explosive arguments and deafening stretches of heavy silence. The older man fiercely demanded absolute respect and unwavering compliance, entirely failing to recognize that genuine love cannot be forcefully extracted through harsh ultimatums. By insisting on teaching his boy a brutal lesson in self-reliance, he completely destroyed the gentle bonds of trust and affection that should naturally exist at home. When this towering figure of British cinema departed from our earthly stage, he left behind a highly complicated personal legacy. Although he was worshipped by millions as an utterly flawless and eternally brave hero on the silver screen, his private reality was profoundly lacking in heroic compassion. His deeply rigid philosophy on raising children serves as a stark warning that sometimes the fiercest protectors in motion pictures can become the most devastating adversaries in life. Oliver Reed. Stepping into a remarkably different realm of raw and unbridled cinematic intensity, we encounter a man whose legendary and deeply turbulent off-screen antics completely overshadowed his undeniable acting brilliance. Throughout the late 1960s and 70s, he was the ultimate brooding heavyweight of British film, radiating a deeply dangerous energy. Yet for his young son growing up in his immense shadow, that exact same terrifying energy transformed their home into a nightmare. Rather than providing a safe and nurturing sanctuary, his enormous country estate functioned as a permanent and fiercely chaotic circus. He was consumed by a relentless thirst for incredibly wild escapades and heavily relied upon intoxicating spirits to fuel his incredibly unpredictable days. His highly sensitive child was frequently dragged into this roaring whirlwind of endless adult gatherings, left completely unattended, while his towering father held court in deeply raucous celebrations. The psychological toll of existing around such a highly volatile and explosive personality was utterly immense for a developing mind. This legendary brute did not view fatherhood as a protective role, but frequently treated his incredibly young boy as merely another unwilling participant in his deeply reckless adventures. He would subject his own flesh and blood to terrifying and highly dangerous games of courage, entirely failing to recognize the profound emotional damage he was inflicting. Stability was a completely foreign concept within their deeply fractured household, as his colossal cinematic earnings were squandered with astonishing speed. Despite commanding massive salaries for his deeply memorable performances across the globe, his exceptionally reckless lifestyle meant his family often faced incredibly precarious circumstances. His son was utterly robbed of his innocent youth, constantly forced into the deeply tragic role of the responsible adult trying to manage a storm. As the decades moved steadily through the 1980s and into the 1990s, the immense emotional chasm between them only deepened. The aging actor steadily lost his leading man status to his highly destructive habits, becoming a tragic caricature of his former glorious self on deeply embarrassing television appearances. Through all of this immense public decline, he never once paused to offer genuine paternal tenderness or a sincere apology for the immense chaos he had caused. When his wildly tumultuous earthly journey finally reached its incredibly abrupt conclusion in 1999, the heavy dust finally settled on a deeply exhausted family. The British public deeply mourned the loss of a profoundly magnetic and uniquely powerful cinematic bruiser who lived entirely by his own extreme rules. However, the deeply hidden truth remains that his fiercely unapologetic approach to life left behind a deeply wounded son who spent decades recovering from his reign. Alec Guinness, widely celebrated as the ultimate chameleon of British cinema, this highly distinguished knight possessed an extraordinary ability to disappear entirely into his roles. Throughout the 1950s, 1960s, and well into the 1970s, his deeply nuanced performances garnered immense global respect and prestigious golden accolades. Yet for all his phenomenal versatility upon the glowing silver screen, he was completely incapable of playing the role of a loving and gentle father in his own profoundly quiet home. To his only son, this globally worshipped cinematic giant was an incredibly distant and terrifyingly stern figure, wrapped securely in an impenetrable cloak of emotional frost. The massive country estate they inhabited was entirely devoid of typical childhood laughter, resembling a strictly governed military barracks rather than a warm familial sanctuary. Any natural display of youthful exuberance was instantly met with deeply chilling glares and severely harsh reprimands that permanently extinguished the fragile light of innocent joy. His own deeply complex and highly guarded upbringing had left him profoundly unequipped to offer any genuine paternal affection or vital emotional support. Instead of guiding his heir with compassion, he constantly viewed the young boy with a deeply unsettling mixture of suspicion and profound irritation, almost treating him as an unwelcome intruder. Whenever the heavy silence of their household was broken, it was usually by his incredibly sharp, biting criticisms that effortlessly tore down the fragile confidence of his own flesh and blood. When his offspring eventually decided to cautiously follow in his colossal theatrical footsteps, the legendary actor offered absolutely no encouragement or industry guidance. Instead of feeling a sense of deep paternal pride, he actively sought to discourage these ambitions, completely refusing to watch his son perform or offer a single word of artistic validation. He fiercely protected his own shining cinematic legacy, seemingly unwilling to share even the tiniest fraction of his glowing spotlight with the very person who needed it the most. As the decades progressed towards the twilight of the 20th century, the immense emotional chasm between the highly decorated patriarch and his profoundly alienated child grew permanently fixed. He retreated further into a deeply secretive and highly isolated existence, heavily prioritizing his own strict routines and private spiritual pursuits over any attempts at familial reconciliation. In his deeply reflective published memoirs, the astonishing absence of his son spoke volumes regarding his profoundly shocking lack of parental empathy. When his incredibly long and deeply celebrated earthly journey peacefully concluded in the year 2000, the immense mourning of the British public was incredibly widespread. Generations of devoted film lovers wept for the passing of a profoundly wise cinematic mentor, a man who had guided young heroes across endless galaxies on the screen. However, behind the heavily veiled curtains of his private reality, his terribly neglected son was left holding onto the sorrowful memory of a deeply flawed man who could never truly open his frozen heart. Richard Burton, Shifting our gaze toward a profoundly different kind of cinematic tragedy, we encounter a spectacularly talented Welshman with a legendary voice of pure gold. Throughout the 1960s and 1970s, his deeply magnetic presence dominated the international box office and captivated millions. Yet this incredibly roaring titan of the silver screen allowed his overwhelmingly intense personal passions to completely obscure the vital needs of his incredibly fragile young family. His profoundly turbulent existence was defined by highly publicized and astonishingly stormy romances that consumed every ounce of his emotional capacity. When he famously embarked upon a remarkably scandalous union with his immensely famous leading lady, he casually left behind his loyal first wife and deeply confused children. For his utterly bewildered offspring, this catastrophic departure felt like an incredibly sudden and brutally sharp betrayal that completely shattered their innocent world. Life within his extraordinarily glamorous orbit was always dictated by his colossal mood swings and a highly destructive reliance on deeply intoxicating spirits. Instead of providing a stable and nurturing paternal foundation, he frequently dragged his utterly exhausted children across the globe from one luxurious hotel suite to another. They were entirely stripped of any normal childhood routines, forced to witness deeply terrifying arguments that heavily echoed through marble palace corridors. Financial wealth was poured upon them in absolute abundance, yet this heavy shower of endless gold completely failed to replace the desperately missing warmth of a gentle father. He treated affection exactly like his theatrical performances, offering incredibly grand but entirely hollow gestures that lacked any genuine emotional depth. His daughters often found themselves waiting hopelessly for quiet moments of sincere connection, only to be heavily overshadowed by his colossal roaring ego. As his undeniably magnificent physical health began to rapidly deteriorate throughout the 1980s, the immense emotional distance between him and his children became tragically permanent. He spent his final earthly chapters completely surrounded by a shifting cast of new companions, whilst his own flesh and blood remained firmly locked on the outside, looking in. They were forced to endure the profound sorrow of watching their heavily weakened father slip away into a deeply lonely end. When his remarkably chaotic earthly journey concluded in 1984, the heavy silence he left behind spoke immense volumes regarding his catastrophic failures at home. The entire globe deeply wept for the loss of an exceptionally brilliant theatrical prince who possessed an incredibly rare and roaring fire. However, the deeply hidden truth remains that the spectacular heat of his intensely dramatic life ended up completely scorching the innocent hearts of his incredibly lonely children. John Osborne, pioneering the entirely revolutionary angry young man movement that completely transformed British cinema and theatre throughout the 1960s, this highly formidable writer and occasional actor possessed an incredibly sharp and deeply merciless intellect. While he was highly celebrated across the globe for bringing raw and heavily blistering reality to the silver screen, the profoundly dark truth was that his endless fury completely poisoned his own highly fractured home. Rather than viewing his domestic sanctuary as a place of gentle peace, he treated his deeply terrified family as merely a captive audience for his incredibly savage emotional outbursts. To his utterly bewildered young daughter, he was not a loving protector, but an immensely terrifying tyrant who completely despised the very concept of typical family life. Any innocent childhood needs were instantly met with deeply chilling scorn and incredibly cruel verbal assaults that left permanent scars. As she slowly grew into a deeply vulnerable teenager, the immense emotional distance between them shifted from incredibly cold indifference into actively hostile warfare. He possessed a truly terrifying ability to identify a person's most profoundly fragile insecurities and would heavily use this deeply dark talent against his own flesh and blood. Instead of offering gentle paternal guidance through her incredibly difficult youth, he relentlessly mocked her entirely innocent dreams and hopes. The absolute peak of his profoundly devastating cruelty arrived when he decided to permanently cast her out of his deeply chaotic earthly existence. In a remarkably shocking and intensely brutal display of absolute parental rejection, he physically banished her from his colossal estate when she was just 17 years old. He entirely refused to provide any financial support or basic human warmth, completely leaving his highly vulnerable child to navigate an incredibly harsh world completely alone. To permanently seal this utterly devastating betrayal, he eventually sent her a deeply horrifying and incredibly vicious written letter that entirely shattered her fragile heart. In these deeply infamous and incredibly poisonous written words, he explicitly stated that he had never possessed a single ounce of genuine love for her. He formally announced that he considered her entirely dead to him, completely erasing his only daughter from his deeply bitter and incredibly isolated earthly reality. When his highly turbulent and deeply angry earthly journey finally concluded in 1994, he left behind a remarkably celebrated cinematic legacy that was deeply stained by his profound personal failures. The British artistic community deeply mourned the loss of a profoundly brilliant and fiercely uncompromising creative giant. However, the deeply sorrowful reality remains that his spectacular linguistic genius was ultimately used as an incredibly brutal weapon against his own child. Peter O'Toole. Concluding our deeply sorrowful exploration of cinematic tragedies, we arrive at a profoundly mesmerizing actor whose bright blue eyes enchanted global audiences. Throughout the 1960s and beyond, his magnificent theatrical presence completely dominated the silver screen. Yet behind the glamorous public facade of a remarkably dashing leading man, there existed a highly volatile and profoundly chaotic father who deeply terrified his completely innocent and highly vulnerable young household. His entire domestic reality was constantly dictated by an incredibly colossal thirst for intensely intoxicating spirits and unpredictable emotional storms. Instead of cultivating a gently nurturing sanctuary for his deeply vulnerable children, he completely transformed their massive home into a dangerous battlefield. Any innocent attempts to seek his gentle paternal affection were frequently met with completely overwhelming waves of profoundly dark anger that completely shattered their delicate peace of mind. To his completely bewildered young daughters, his towering earthly presence felt incredibly similar to a highly destructive and entirely uncontainable natural disaster. They were frequently forced to tiptoe completely silently around his colossal roaring moods, entirely terrified of accidentally triggering another spectacular explosion. He heavily demanded completely unquestioning obedience, yet entirely failed to offer the fundamental emotional safety that a growing child so desperately and deeply requires. Whenever his immense theatrical career demanded his majestic presence on incredibly distant international film sets, his profoundly chaotic family was simply dragged along into the massive roaring whirlwind. They completely lacked any semblance of ordinary educational routine or deeply comforting childhood stability, continually thrust into highly confusing adult environments. He prioritized his highly eccentric personal desires completely over their incredibly basic needs for a deeply peaceful, quiet existence. As the lengthy decades steadily rolled into the 1980s and 1990s, his immense physical health began to completely falter under the heavy strain of his extreme lifestyle. The profound emotional distance between the highly celebrated icon and his deeply exhausted children became an incredibly tragic fixture of their earthly reality. They spent countless profoundly sorrowful years desperately trying to completely heal from the immense psychological damage his incredibly wild existence caused. When his incredibly long and deeply turbulent earthly journey finally concluded in 2013, the British public profoundly wept for the departure of a brilliant cinematic king. However, the deeply sorrowful truth remains that his majestic legacy was completely shadowed by his profound personal failures as a protector. He will always be remembered as a towering giant of the stage who unfortunately completely crushed the fragile spirits of his own very lonely family.